The first thing I saw when I got home from the hospital wasn't my couch, or my dog, or even my own bed. It was a bright red sold sign staked into my front yard. For a second, I honestly thought I was still drugged up. That maybe I'd taken a wrong turn and ended up in front of somebody else's house. But then I recognized the wind chime my late wife hung by the porch. The crack in the third step. The faded paint where my son Mark used to sit and tie his cleats before Little League. My house. Sold. I stood there with my overnight bag cutting into my hand, feeling that post-surgery weakness in my legs, and I stared at it like it was an insult written in all caps. Mark came out like he'd been waiting. He didn't even look surprised to see me. He just looked annoyed. Like my presence ruined his timing. "Dad," he said, walking down the steps, "we need to talk inside." "Why is there a sold sign in my yard?" My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. He took the bag from my hand like he was helping, but his grip was tight. Controlling. "Let's not do this out here." Inside, my living room looked staged. Too clean. The family photos were gone from the mantel. My wife's quilt folded away. Even the smell was different, like lemon cleaner covering something rotten. Mark stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. I sold the house. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because my brain couldn't accept it. "You did what?" "Dad, you were in the hospital. Bills were coming in. And you can't be here alone after surgery anyway. This is the practical move." The practical move, I repeated, like I was tasting poison. He pulled out his phone and swiped through something, emails, documents, I don't know, and shoved the screen toward me. "It's done. The closing already happened." Closing. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with my heart procedure. "You don't own this house," I said. Mark's expression flickered. "I'm your son." That's not an answer. He exhaled hard, like I was being difficult. "Dad, you always said this house would be mine someday. I just moved up the timeline." That sentence did something to me. It took me right back to when he was 15, slamming doors, deciding rules didn't apply to him. Back then it was curfews and teachers. Now it was my home. "What did you do?" I asked quietly. Mark's jaw worked side to side. "I had you sign paperwork a while back." I stared at him. "What paperwork?" "You don't remember," he said, and his tone got slick. I brought it by. "You said, sure. We were at the kitchen table." I did remember him sliding papers across my table. I remembered asking, "Is this for the hospital?" And him saying, "Just in case, Dad." I thought it was medical stuff. Emergency contact. Maybe something about making decisions if I was under anesthesia. I felt cold. "You sold my house with that?" I asked. He shrugged. "You weren't using it. And I needed to get ahead of some things." Some things meant his debts. The ones he always promised were temporary. The ones that kept showing up as angry phone calls and urgent envelopes he never opened. He leaned in, voice low. "The new owner's an investor. They'll be by soon to measure. You should start packing." I looked at my own son and realized he'd already imagined the end of me. Not death, worse. Irrelevance. A father reduced to a suitcase. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just nodded, like I understood. "Okay," I said. "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." He blinked. "Dad." I said okay. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my room staring at the ceiling fan my wife picked out, and I listened to Mark moving around downstairs like he owned the place. Around 6 a.m., I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and made 2 phone calls. First, to the county recorder's office. Second, to the attorney who helped me after my wife passed, because back then I'd made myself a promise. That grief wouldn't turn into chaos for my family. That whatever happened, my granddaughter Lily would never feel the ground disappear under her feet. 3 years earlier, I'd filed a life estate deed. It was simple. I kept the legal right to live in my home for the rest of my life. And when I was gone, the house would go directly to Lily. Not Mark. Not anyone who could gamble it, borrow against it, or move up the timeline. I didn't tell Mark because I knew Mark. And I didn't do it to punish him. I did it to protect a little girl who deserved one stable place in a world full of grown-up excuses. By noon, I had a certified copy of the recorded deed in my hands. The ink wasn't dramatic. The paper wasn't magical. but it was the truth stamped and dated. That afternoon, a man in a polo shirt knocked on my door holding a clipboard. "I'm here for the property walkthrough," he said politely. "New owners expecting possession soon." I stepped onto the porch and handed him the deed copy. He skimmed it, eyes narrowing. Then he looked at me like he finally saw me. "Not as an obstacle, an owner." "I need to make a call," he said, and walked back to his car. Mark came out minutes later, phone pressed to his ear, face red. "Dad, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said. "I showed them what you hoped no one would check." He hung up and hissed, "They're saying the title's clouded. They're saying this sale might be invalid." "Might?" I asked. Mark shoved a folder at me, papers I'd never seen before. "They're threatening legal action. The buyer. The title company. Everybody." I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to. I walked to the dining room, pulled out the certified deed, and laid it flat on the table between us like a final plate at dinner. Mark stared at it. His mouth opened, then closed. "What is that?" he whispered, like he didn't recognize my handwriting. "That," I said, "is the deed you didn't know existed." He jabbed a finger at the page. "You put Lily on it?" "I protected Lily," I corrected. His eyes flashed. "So what, you don't trust me?" I leaned forward, not angry, steady. "You sold my house while I was in the hospital. Don't ask me about trust." For a moment, I saw something like fear. Not for me. For himself. For consequences. He swallowed. "You're really going to do this to me?" "No," I said softly. "You did this to you." That was the quiet revenge. Not screaming. Not humiliation. Just letting the truth stand up on its own legs. My attorney filed what she needed to file. The investor backed off fast when they realized they couldn't get clean possession. The title company started digging into how Mark sold anything in the first place. And when they found out he'd used paperwork that didn't authorize selling, when they saw signatures that didn't match, things got serious. Mark didn't go to jail. This isn't that kind of story. But he did get sued. He did have to pay restitution. And he did have to explain himself in rooms where charm doesn't work and tears don't erase fraud. He called me late one night, voice small for the first time in years. "Dad, I messed up," he said. I held the phone and stared at the same kitchen table where he'd slid those papers toward me. "Yes," I said. "You did." He waited for me to rescue him. I didn't. What I did instead was show up for Lily. I kept the house. I updated my will. I put protections in place so no one could pressure me in a hospital bed again. And when Lily came over the next weekend, we planted new flowers under the porch, where that sold sign used to be. She looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, are we staying here?" I nodded and my throat tightened. "As long as I'm breathing." She smiled, like the world made sense again. Here's what I learned, later than I wish I had: love without boundaries isn't love. It's permission. And sometimes the strongest thing a father can do isn't fighting with his son. It's telling the truth, putting it in writing, and letting grown men meet the consequences they earned.